Alright, now that we have let our poor computer work all night long on the rendering of the Talented Ball project, it is time for us to take a look at the results. So in this video, we'll kick things off with a quick review of what has been rendered out, and then from there, we'll start talking about our depth passes. That was not something that was taken into account in our render script for the simple fact that the depth passes are, I guess you could say, a very special case render pass. So with that, Steve, let's begin by first looking at what has been rendered out.
Great, so I'm going to bring up our project folder, and we can see we've had a renders folder created within our project. And inside we now have folders for each of our shots to keep things nice and organized on a shot-by-shot basis. And inside each of these folders we now have folders based on objects and also a shadow folder which has our shadow passes in. So jumping inside any of these folders, we're going to see all of the frames for various lighting passes, so we can see our audience underscore ambience underscore diffuse with all the frames. And as we scroll down, we can see things like bleachers bounce, bleachers top, rim light diffuse, rim light specular. So everything's kept nice and organized on an object by object basis, on a shot by shot basis. So we can come into, say, shot 3, and we're going to have our audience, character, floor, set, shadow, and stadium. We could jump inside the character and see things like our main spotlight passes, our secondary spotlight passes, our bounce pass. We've got our fill, our rim, diffuse, and specular. We've got our main spots, diffuse, and specular. So everything is kept nice and organized. Now let's jump over into Houdini, and we can load up mplay, and we can bring in some of these render passes and just see some of the passes that we rendered out. So I'm going to come down to render, mplay, and load disk files. And I'm going to jump up to our projects folder, jump into the renders folder, and I'm going to grab a couple of the passes from shot 2, and then we'll go ahead and grab a couple of the passes from shot 3. So let's jump into shot 2. I'm going to grab the character, and let's grab the main spotlight's diffuse pass for our character in shot 2. So I'm going to select that and load it in. And if we play that back, I will turn on real time, we can see we've only got our character in the pass. If we look at our alpha, we only have the character in our pass, and we're only seeing the diffuse illumination from our main spotlights. We could load up the secondary spotlight specular pass. If we load that in and play that back, we're going to see on a few frames that we're picking up the specular highlights from our red, green, and blue secondary spotlights. And again, if we look at the alpha, we've only got our character in this pass.
Open up the character secondary diffuse. Just curious.
That's kind of a cool pass. You're not going to notice much at the first, but then when he moves through into the spotlight around these frames, we start with the blue, we then pick up on the red, and then eventually we enter into the green. So it's kind of a nice pass. Let's take a look at some of the audience passes on shot 3, because I particularly like these passes. So we can hunt down our rim light diffuse for the audience on shot 3, and you can see that because of our naming and because of our organization, it's very quick to go in, find the shot we want, find the object that we want, and then find the lights we want, especially as mplay condenses all of our frames into sequences, since we've checked the show sequences as one entry. So I can jump into the shot 3 audience folder and quickly hunt down which light am I looking for, rim light, which pass am I looking for, diffuse. So we can load that in.
Nice. So now we're tracking our character climbing up the ladder.
And then we're going to see the crane.
Up. Very nice. And he's about to jump off. They're about to get excited. Outstanding.
Cool. We could also take a look at a shadow pass. Let's take a look at the main spotlight shadow pass for this particular shot. Now with this pass, we are going to need to get mplay to load in all of the images while looking at the color, which is going to be a black channel. It's just one of those things with mplay, getting it to load in and show us our alpha for a whole sequence. You sometimes have to play around switching back between color and alpha a few times. Once we've loaded in the color for everything, we can then switch over to our alpha channel, and we'll see shadows in that channel, which if we play back, we can see all of the shadows for our main spotlights on all of our objects, since we make sure that all of our objects are indeed in that pass. We're getting shadows cast down onto the audience, we're getting shadows cast on our ladder, and we're also getting shadows cast in the pool and the rest of the set. So this is a really interesting pass to take a look at. But I mean, we could spend all day and go through all of the passes, and I actually recommend everyone going through all of their passes, making sure you didn't make any mistakes in your render description file, make sure all objects that should be in the passes are in the passes. I guess the final thing I could show is one of our passes where our ladder mask has really helped us out, because in the fourth shot, our character actually does pass behind the ladder, and we kept the ladder mask in place in these files. So let's find our character, and I guess the character fill will show this nicely. We can see in the alpha channel as we pass behind the ladder, we've got the ladder now masking out our character, and also in the color channel as we pass behind the ladder's masking out our character, because we had the ladder object duplicated with that mask, and we made sure that that object was included in our render.
That's right. Of course, the ladder being the diving board in this very specific case.
In that specific case, it is the diving board. I'm referring to it as the ladder because of the whole asset being called the ladder, even though it doesn't necessarily make the most logical sense. Great, so with that, I'm going to jump back into Houdini, and let's talk a little bit about setting up our depth passes. So our depth pass is going to be a very special pass. It's going to have all of our objects in for a single shot. We do not need to worry about lighting, since we're only concerned with how far away is a particular pixel that's being rendered from our camera. Now to do this, I'm going to jump over to our outputs context, and I'm going to create another render node. And it's really as simple as telling our render node to make sure that we add an extra plane. So we've already seen we've got our color channels and we've got our alpha channel. We can add as many custom channels as we want when we're dealing with the pic format. And that's going to allow us to add an extra channel that stores that position in Z. And that channel is going to be a floating point channel, so it's going to have a lot of information in there as opposed to just being an 8-bit channel. So I'm going to push tab to bring up our tab menu. I'm going to create a new mantra render node. I'm going to rename this to something like mantra depth for shot 1. And on the mantra depth for shot 1, the first thing I want to do is set up our frame range for shot 1. So I'm going to set it to render frame range. And shot 1 was from frames 1 to 220. We do need to make sure we specify the correct camera for shot 1. So we're going to be rendering through the shot 1 camera. I can then jump over to the objects tab. And I'm going to take out our candidate lights, so we don't have any lights included in this render. And what that means is we're not going to render any lighting, so we won't have anything in our color channel. If we were to leave candidate lights in, all of our lights are going to be included in the render. We're going to get a color channel with all of our lights as well as our depth channel, and that's wasted time on rendering. We don't need to render any of our lights. We're only interested in depth in this case. So by removing the star wildcard from candidate lights, we remove all lights from our render, and we only worry now about rendering out our depth information.
And as a result, much faster render time.
A lot faster render times. So I'm going to come over to the Properties tab and specify an output sequence. So I'm going to bring up our browser, hunt down our renders folder, and since we're dealing with shot 1, I'm going to jump into the shot 1 folder, create a new folder manually that I'm going to call depth. If we jump inside the depth folder, I'm going to name these files depth underscore shot 01.$f3.pic. So we're going to have depth for shot 1, and we're going to have our frame number using $f3 expression, and it's going to be the pic format. The pic format in this case is incredibly important because it's a special format that allows us to have multiple channels. Let's jump back to Houdini. So now that we've got our output image set up, how do we go about actually dealing with creating an additional image plane? Well, we can scroll down and we can see we've got extra image planes currently set to 0. If we click on the plus, we're going to create a new image plane. And we have to specify which vex variable do we wish to render into this image plane. And there's a few to choose from by default, and you can actually export variables from your own shaders and then bring those in and render those out if you want to create really advanced layers for compositing. But we're dealing with position in Z, we're dealing with our depth, and that's this position in Z in terms of the local space of our camera, Z being the axis that gives us depth for our camera. So we're going to render out the PZ variable. And this is actually a float type, not a vector type, since it's a single coordinate. If we were rendering out, say, position, for example, that would be a vector. It has X, Y, and Z. But in this case, we're only rendering PZ, so we're only rendering a float. So you need to make sure you set this over to float, or again, the render won't actually render out correctly. Finally, we have the ability to specify whether we're dealing with float values or integer values. I want to leave this set to a 32-bit float, so we have the most information in our depth channel as possible. It will result in larger file sizes, but I'm happy with that compromise for the accuracy that we get in our images. So that's set up for shot 1, so I can Control-C, Control-V to grab for shot 2. And we need to modify things like our frame range, our camera, and our output file for shot 2. So what frame range did we use for shot 2? I'm going to jump up and grab our render description for shot 2. And we rendered from 219 to 300. So I'm going to set our frame range to 219 to 300. I'm going to set our output picture, jump up until we can see shot 2, jump into shot 2, create a depth folder within shot 2, and jump inside that depth folder. In this case, we're going to have depth underscore shot2.f3.pic, so I'm going to accept that. And we also need to make sure on the main tab that we specify our shot02 camera. I'm going to Control-C, Control-V this again for shot 3, specify our shot 3 camera. We need to specify our frame range for shot 3, which if we bring up our shot 3 render description, that was 265 through to 650. So 265 to 650. And on the Properties tab, I'm going to specify our output picture, jumping up till we can see the shot 3 folder, jumping inside that, creating a new depth folder. Jumping inside that depth folder, and in this case we're going to have depth underscore shot3.f3.pic, and accept. And then Control-C, Control-V one final time to set up for shot 4. We're going to be specifying an output picture. If we jump up and up, jump into the shot 4 folder, create a depth folder within that. Jump inside, we can rename this to depth underscore shot04.f3.pic. We do need to specify our shot 04 camera, and we need to specify our frame range for shot 4, which was 613 through to 650. So 613 through to 650. With all those in place, we can marquee select all of these guys, and then to go ahead and render out those depth passes, we just simply come up and click on the render button. We're going to go ahead and do that off of camera, and when we come back in the next video, we'll have all of our depth passes as well as all of the passes that our script rendered out.
Sounds good.
Cool, thanks a lot.